Sports often presents us with moments that go beyond the scoreboard, moments that reveal deeper, sometimes darker, aspects. This isn't about the game-winning shot, the championship, or the fairy tale. This is about a powerful man, a video that holds more secrets than the camera can capture, and a nation's reflection on the culture behind it. It all started as a normal basketball practice at Rutgers University. Sneakers clicked on the floor, whistles blared in the gym, young players busily practicing and chasing their dreams. At the center of it all was head coach Mike Rice, strong, authoritative, and fierce. But behind the walls of the gym, something unusual happened. A video emerged. It was grainy and low quality, but its contents were unmistakable. Coach Mike Rice yelling at players, throwing basketballs at their heads and groins, grabbing their jerseys, kicking them, and shouting profanities. His behavior was no longer encouragement or love, but outright abuse, captured in disturbing detail. Then came the slurs. Homophobic insults hurled across the gym, directed at teenage athletes. At Rutgers, where such language carried a painful history, the words cut deeper than any physical harm. When the video leaked to the public, it spread rapidly, sparking outrage. Parents, students, alumni, and people everywhere were appalled. Calls for Mike Rice's firing dominated news cycles. Politicians spoke out. Even comedy shows like The Daily Show and Saturday Night Live mocked him. But beneath the satire, a serious conversation began to emerge. Was Mike Rice just a single bad coach? Or was his behavior evidence of a more systemic problem in sports culture? Up until then, Mike Rice was an obscure figure outside collegiate basketball. Overnight, he became a symbol of toxic coaching, unchecked power, and what happens when winning at all costs overshadows basic decency. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie voiced the nation's disbelief, saying that if Mike Rice had been Kobe Bryant's coach, he would have smacked the hell out of him. Soon, parents everywhere were asking a haunting question whether they would let that man coach their child. As the scandal erupted, Mike Rice vanished from the public eye, left to deal with the consequences, professionally, personally, and emotionally. He was fired, his reputation destroyed. At home, he faced his wife and children, knowing he had let them down. This story wasn't just about punishment. It became a reflection on anger, ego, toxic culture, and regret. And perhaps, in some ways, redemption. But if redemption was possible, it wouldn't come easily or quickly. Because some mistakes leave marks that time, and even apologies cannot erase. Before he became infamous as the coach who crossed the line, Mike Rice was just a kid who loved basketball. The sport was practically in his DNA. His mother had been a star college player, and his father, Mike Rice Sr., was a former coach and well-known NBA broadcaster. Mike Sr. was famously fiery, so much so that he remains the only NBA broadcaster ever ejected from a game, tossed out for arguing with a referee from the announcer's table. In the Rice household, basketball wasn't just a pastime, it was a way of life. The game shaped family dinners, fueled debates, and ignited passion. It wasn't seen as toxic. It was simply part of who they were. Mike Rice seemed destined to follow in his family's footsteps. He played college basketball and slowly climbed the coaching ladder. His journey was not an overnight success. Starting at smaller programs, he moved from assistant coaching roles to head coach positions, earning a reputation for relentless effort and intense dedication to the game. He was focused, determined, hungry. However, Unchecked intensity can sometimes take a darker turn. Mike got his first taste of success at Robert Morris University, a small school in western Pennsylvania, where he transformed a struggling basketball team into a winner. Under his leadership, Robert Morris enjoyed a 3-year winning streak and earned a spot in the NCAA tournament. His energy and intensity were central to this turnaround. Practices were tough, often harder than the games. Mike believed that this pressure would build resilience, pushing his players to, and sometimes beyond, their limits. In the small school environment, with less media scrutiny and fewer critics, Mike's demanding style flourished. But success brought attention, and in 2010 he was hired as the head basketball coach at Rutgers University. Along with a 6-figure salary, Mike was given a daunting task to transform the struggling program in one of the country's premier conferences, the Big East. The pressure was immense. Rutgers had been stuck at the bottom of the Big East standings for years, and the program needed revitalization. Mike promised to provide that spark. At first, he appeared to deliver, injecting new energy and demanding more from his players. But away from the public eye, his intense methods started to raise concerns. At home, Mike's wife, Kathy, picked up on warning signs early: his language, anger, and emotional outbursts. She frequently addressed it with him, but the behavior didn't change. In Mike's mind, his methods weren't abusive. They were meant to prepare players for the harsh realities of basketball and life. He believed his intensity built toughness. To him, if his players couldn't handle his criticism, how would they handle high-pressure moments in games? He failed to realize he had already crossed a line on the court. Mike's temper became more apparent. He often yelled at referees, berated players, and even drew technical fouls. During one particularly heated game against Louisville, Mike was ejected. Alarmed by his behavior, the director asked him why. If he was such a great coach, he kept embarrassing the university. Mike saw it differently. Later, he said that he hadn't had an anger problem and that it was a myth. He explained that he had a control problem and had lost control, emphasizing that there was a difference. However, he ignored warnings from his wife, his bosses, and even his assistant coaches, all of whom had tried to curb his destructive behavior. Driven by his ambition to prove himself, Mike became increasingly tunnel-visioned, losing sight of the purpose of coaching. For a time, Mike's methods were overlooked because winning seemed to matter more than how he achieved it. Rutgers didn't fire him, choosing instead to wait and hope his behavior would improve. However, behind the scenes, someone was already taking action. Eric Murdoch, a former NBA player and assistant coach at Rutgers, had collaborated closely with Mike for many years. After Rutgers chose not to renew Eric's contract, he made a fateful decision, reviewing hours of internal practice footage, a public record since Rutgers is a state school. Eric compiled the worst examples of Mike's abusive behavior into a video and handed it over to the administration. That act set off a countdown to Mike's firing and the national scandal that would follow. Mike Rice came to Rutgers in 2010 as an unpolished but hungry coach who had transformed a small program into a winner. Unlike coaches with prestigious backgrounds or legendary mentors, Mike was scrappy and determined to prove he belonged. In a college sports culture fixated on immediate success, that hunger was enough for him to land the job. Rutgers needed change. After years of failure, the program had lost its fan base, student support, and financial backers. Mike promised to reignite passion, deliver results, and break the team out of its slump. At first, it appeared he might succeed, but his harmful methods ultimately overshadowed any progress he had made. From day one, he attacked his job with urgency. His approach was intense. He pushed players relentlessly, shouting and demanding more, never satisfied. He wasn't a quiet or constructive coach. Instead, he screamed, cursed, and berated. Miss a defensive rotation, you'd get an earful. Fail a drill, you'd run it again and again, until you collapsed. Initially, some players respected his intensity, believing he was toughening them up, preparing them for pressure and the realities of life. They would say that was just how the coach was, and that he was old school. But his old school methods quickly crossed the line, repeatedly and behind closed doors. In the practice facility, his behavior escalated. He threw basketballs at players, sometimes at their legs, sometimes at their heads. He shoved them, yanked their jerseys, and hurled slurs, using homophobic insults like faggots, fairies, and sissies. He mocked and humiliated players. This wasn't an occasional lapse. It was systematic and ongoing abuse. This wasn't leadership. This was assault disguised as coaching. And the worst part, everyone saw it. Eric Murdoch, a former NBA player and respected figure in basketball, joined Mike's staff as the director of player development. At first, he supported Mike's vision, but what he witnessed shocked him. Disturbed, Eric started documenting the abuse. As a public university, Rutgers recorded all official team practices and stored the video footage. Eric sifted through hours of archived tape, compiling a reel of damning evidence. That reel would ultimately expose everything. But within the program, a toxic culture protected Mike. Despite numerous complaints, warnings, and internal reviews, no one stopped him. The athletic department knew. The university president knew. Some staff members spoke out, but their concerns were dismissed or ignored. Why? Because firing a head coach wasn't just a disciplinary decision, it was a financial one. Mike's contract included a substantial buyout. Firing him could cost Rutgers over $1 million. So they tried to manage the issue quietly, issuing a fine, suspending him for a few games, and requiring anger management classes. They gave no public explanation, no transparency. Meanwhile, the players were trapped. Many were on scholarships. Their future opportunities depended on staying in the coach's good graces. Speaking out could mean losing playing time, support, or even their spot on the team. Some transferred to other schools. Some stayed silent. A few tried to justify what was happening. The abuse continued. Mike didn't think he was doing anything wrong. In his mind, he was molding boys into men. Breaking them down would make them stronger. He saw himself as tough but fair. Having grown up in a household where yelling was normal and passion was loud, he didn't believe he was crossing any lines, but he ignored the signals. His staff's concerns, his family's warnings, and the quiet suffering of his players. Mike's wife, Kathy, had been begging him to change for years. After games, she would point to footage on TV, showing him his rage-filled face and choice of words. She urged him to think about their children, who were starting to hear rumors. But Mike dismissed her. In his mind, his methods would be validated by results. But the results weren't coming. Rutgers wasn't improving. Mike's win-loss record remained unimpressive, and the pressure on him grew. Boosters demanded more success. The athletic department became uneasy. With every outburst, he became harder to defend. And then, things finally reached a breaking point. After Rutgers chose not to renew Eric Murdoch's contract, he handed over the practice footage he had compiled to the athletic department again. This time, he delivered a clear ultimatum if action wasn't taken. He would make sure the footage became public. For months, no action was taken. Then, on April 2nd, 2013, ESPN's Outside the Lines released the footage to the public. What followed left America stunned. The videos revealed Rutgers basketball coach Mike Rice cursing, throwing balls at players' heads, hurling slurs, and physically grabbing athletes mid-practice. These weren't isolated incidents. The footage included dozens of clips, spliced together. They painted a horrifying picture of a coach completely out of control. The reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming. Social media exploded. News outlets replayed the footage non-stop. Sports radio slammed Rutgers for protecting Mike. Journalists began questioning who knew about the abuse and when. Students protested. Alumni threatened to cut off donations. Parents of players expressed their outrage. Within 24 hours, Mike Rice was fired, but the damage had already been done. The scandal quickly escalated. Rutgers athletic director Tim Pernetti, who had decided not to fire Mike earlier, resigned. The university's general counsel stepped down. The president of Rutgers faced intense criticism. Everyone involved in keeping the abuse under wraps was now under investigation. This was no longer just about Mike. It exposed deeper issues within college athletics. A culture that prioritized winning over player welfare. A system where money outweighed morality. A tradition where young athletes, many still teenagers, were expected to stay silent about mistreatment. Mike disappeared from public view, becoming synonymous with disgrace. Many of his players moved on, though some carried emotional scars from their time under his volatile leadership. Some forgave him, but others refused to speak with him again. In the following months, Mike sought help. He entered anger management, met with therapists, and began volunteering with high schools and youth sports leagues. He tried to rebuild himself and his reputation, quietly and slowly, but for many, it was far too late. The footage couldn't be erased, and the memories of his behavior couldn't be unseen. The scandal revealed what Mike was really like behind closed doors, who he truly was when no one was supposed to be watching. Mike built his career on fiery intensity, but ultimately destroyed it through cruelty. The same culture that once celebrated his passion was now responsible for his fall. In early April 2013, the footage went viral. Grainy practice clips shot inside Rutgers' basketball facility were broadcast nationwide by ESPN's Outside the Lines. Within hours, the videos were everywhere, on Twitter, Facebook, news channels, and YouTube. Almost overnight, it seemed like the entire country had seen what was never meant to be public. No narration or commentary was necessary. The footage said it all. The clips showed Mike stalking the gym floor, his face red with rage and veins bulging as he screamed insults. He hurled basketballs at players with force. One incident showed a ball bouncing off a player's head, another ricocheting off a leg. The videos captured him lunging at players, grabbing them, and shouting slurs like faggots, sissies, and motherfuckers. Every word echoed like a weapon in the gym. This was far more than intensity. It was outright abuse, and the entire world saw it, from homes to dorm rooms to break rooms across the nation. People watched the footage in disbelief. Some shook their heads in disgust. Others turned away. While some replayed the video just to reassure themselves they hadn't misinterpreted what they saw. The media responded immediately. Overnight, Mike became a national disgrace. He wasn't just a bad coach. He was that coach, the one who bullied and humiliated his players on camera. ESPN analysts dissected the video. Late-night comedians mocked him, and public figures joined in to condemn him. Famous athletes like Charles Barkley, LeBron James, and Magic Johnson weighed in. Even coaches known for their strictness and discipline agreed that Mike had crossed every line imaginable. The fallout continued at Rutgers. Within a day of the footage going public, the university was in chaos. The outcry was deafening. Students protested in the streets of New Brunswick, demanding accountability. Outraged parents called into local radio stations, furious that their children had been subjected to Mike's treatment. Alumni threatened to end their financial support of the university. The scandal had spilled far beyond the gym. It wasn't just about Mike anymore. It was about the broken culture of college sports. The phones at the president's office were ringing non-stop. Reporters set up camp outside the athletic department. Board members scrambled to hold emergency meetings. At the center of the chaos was Tim Pernetti, the athletic director who had seen the footage months earlier, but chose not to fire Mike Rice. It was soon obvious that this wasn't a case of a university blindsided by new revelations. Rutgers had already known. The video had been submitted months prior, and internal meetings had taken place. Mike had been suspended for 3 games, fined $75,000, and ordered to attend anger management. But the video itself was kept under wraps. Now, that decision seemed like a deliberate cover-up. Tim Pernetti released a public statement saying that he had always tried to do what was right. But in that case, he regretted not taking stronger action sooner. His statement did little to control the damage, but by then, the damage was done. The entire Rutgers athletic program was under intense scrutiny. Critics questioned the university's leadership, its values, and the culture that allowed such behavior to go unchecked. Even New Jersey Governor Chris Christie weighed in, calling the video footage appalling and stating Mike should have been fired immediately. The scandal reached beyond Rutgers, prompting colleges nationwide to re-examine their policies and oversight. If such behavior could happen and be documented at Rutgers, what might be happening behind closed doors elsewhere? Meanwhile, Eric Murdoch, the whistleblower who turned in the tape, sparked mixed reactions. Some hailed him as a hero for exposing the toxic culture, while others accused him of acting out of spite after his contract wasn't renewed. Eric dismissed the accusations, saying in interviews that he hadn't done it for revenge, but because he believed it was wrong. He stated that what Mike did to those players was not how human beings should be treated. As the media frenzy slightly subsided in the weeks that followed, the consequences of the scandal continued to unfold. Former players' parents began speaking out, revealing that their sons came home emotionally drained. Some admitted they had advised their children to stay quiet, not wanting to risk losing their scholarships. Other players, like former Rutgers guard Derek Randall, shared first-hand accounts of how Mike's abusive behavior left lasting scars. Some players defended Mike, saying he pushed them to improve and wasn't a bad person. But the footage painted a stark picture. The line had been crossed, time and time again. As for Mike, he eventually broke his silence in a televised interview, admitting that he had been wrong. He said he had no excuse, that he had lost control, let his emotions take over, and let down the people he cared about most. Mike didn't try to justify his behavior or shift blame. He acknowledged that he had failed as a leader, and he said the most painful part of it all was facing his children's disappointment. Mike described his therapy sessions as the most difficult experience of his life. Week after week, he was forced to watch the tape, not as a coach, but as a father, husband, and human being. Over time, Mike Rice started volunteering with youth basketball programs. He led clinics, mentored young players, and gave speeches about emotional control and the power of words. Some viewed these actions as genuine growth, while others saw them as an attempt to repair his reputation. Regardless of intent, the scandal cast a lasting shadow. The Rutgers basketball program struggled to recover. Recruiting efforts faltered, players transferred, morale plummeted, and the university spent years working to rebuild trust with students, families, and donors alike. The NCAA, already criticized for other issues, faced renewed scrutiny over its lack of oversight and the treatment of student athletes. Lawmakers pushed for reforms aimed at protecting athletes from abusive coaching. Some schools introduced stricter reporting systems, while others quietly re-examined their own programs, hoping to avoid a similar controversy. Yet despite these reforms, one fundamental truth remained: no policy. Training, or code of conduct, can stop abuse without individuals stepping up to confront it when they see it. The Rutgers case wasn't just about a coach losing his temper. It exposed a system that enabled and protected him while silencing those who tried to speak out. Mike didn't just betray his players. The institution failed them as well. That's why the video was so shocking. It wasn't just the disturbing footage. It was the years of silence, excuses, fear, money, and a toxic culture that allowed this behavior to thrive behind closed doors. In a televised interview, Mike issued a public apology, not to save his career, which was nearly destroyed, but to explain what had driven him to that point. He admitted that he had been out of control and that he had let his competitive drive override his values. He also confessed that he had coached through fear and anger, and that wasn't the kind of person he wanted to be. He didn't cry or plead for forgiveness. He didn't offer excuses. Instead, he took responsibility for his actions, acknowledging the pain he caused, especially to his players. Still, many remained skeptical. Some dismissed his remorse as calculated and insincere, a case of too little, too late. After all, how could someone who hurled slurs one year claim personal transformation the next? Former players were divided. Some privately spoke of enduring trauma, panic attacks, mistrust of authority, and memories of practices burned into their minds. Others defended Mike, arguing that he never intended harm and had helped them grow tougher and more focused. Yet even his supporters couldn't ignore the undeniable truth captured on video. This wasn't speculation. It was documented abuse. Rutgers didn't forgive him. The NCAA didn't welcome him back. No other programs reached out. His name became toxic. Parents didn't want him around their kids. Colleges avoided dealing with the questions his presence would raise. So Mike started over, not with college athletes, but with kids. He began volunteering at youth basketball camps, arriving in old sneakers and a simple t-shirt, no fancy title, no paycheck, just a whistle, a gym full of middle schoolers, and a chance to begin again with those too young to know the scandal. He taught them drills and ran warm-ups. He shared stories but also spoke about emotions, pressure, and how yelling isn't leadership. He reminded the kids that their worth wasn't tied to how many points they scored, but how they treated their teammates. Over time, some parents began to trust him with their kids. A few stayed wary, keeping their distance. But Mike wasn't asking for redemption. He just kept showing up. Back home, his wife, Kathy, stayed by his side. She had always been his voice of reason. While she didn't excuse his actions, she didn't leave him. Their family, deeply affected by the public shame, focused on healing. Their son, once teased and humiliated at school, began talking about forgiveness. Their daughter, who initially refused to watch the footage, started attending clinics again. This time, she saw her father differently, not as the man who lost control, but someone working to regain it. Still, the past lingered. In gyms or grocery stores, people sometimes recognized him. They whispered, pointed fingers, and occasionally confronted him. Some stayed silent, offering only a look that said everything. Mike didn't argue or make excuses in those moments, but acknowledged it, telling a friend that he had earned that and all he could do now was try to be better. As the years went by, the scandal faded from public attention. Headlines focused on new controversies, new scandals, and new villains. But for Mike, it never really ended. It stayed with him in therapy sessions, family dinners, and the quiet moments at kids' basketball camps between drills. He never coached college basketball again. He didn't aim for national recognition. He never even tried. Instead, he kept rebuilding, not for public opinion or media redemption, but for the people closest to him, the ones he faced every day, the ones who mattered the most. This wasn't about fixing his reputation. It was about accepting responsibility. And that is the difference between regret and true remorse. The Mike scandal didn't end with his firing. It sparked a reckoning. It forced college athletics to reevaluate the line between being a tough coach and being abusive. It revealed how some institutions prioritize image over accountability. It reminded everyone that behind every player, behind every jersey and scholarship, is a human being who deserves respect, not just discipline. Mike never returned to the college basketball stage. His name remains tied to a pivotal moment when private misconduct was dragged into public view. His story didn't fade, though. It exists in policy changes, coaching workshops, and in the tougher questions administrators now ask about what happens out of public sight. For his former players, the story leaves a personal legacy. Some carry scars, some carry lessons, but all lived through a moment that reshaped the sport and their coach. For Mike, redemption isn't a goal to achieve. It's a lifelong process of repair. The tape doesn't lie, but what a person does after the tape stops, how they take responsibility, how they change, that's the part that's harder to see.